How do I protect my money after I'm gone? Well, this is a complicated issue, and many people wonder about this very topic. Luckily, today we have attorney Joseph Marra to explain.
Well, there's two things. I mean, we have parents and we have ourselves as we grow older. How do your parents protect their money? How do you protect your money? Well, there's two things you need to consider. Number one, is your estate going to be large enough to be subject to estate tax? What the government does is when you pass away, they take a snapshot of what you're worth, and they will impose a tax if you're above a certain limit. Now, that limit has been steadily climbing. The federal estate tax does not kick in until someone's over $12.75 million. And that's indexed for inflation, so it kind of goes up every year. And if you have a spouse, you can easily shelter double that, right, if you're married. But people also have to think about the state estate tax. Now, New York State has an estate tax that kicks in at about $5.75 million. And we call it a cliff tax because when your estate goes a certain level above that, they tax you from $1. So it's not insignificant. So the first thing you have to look at is, okay, is my estate going to be subject to estate tax? The second thing you have to look at, if I need to go into a nursing home, what coverage do I have? Who's going to pay for it? Now, unfortunately, certain things like Alzheimer's, dementia are the wrong diseases. People think that, Medicare will cover it. Yes and no. As you'll hear, the Medicare benefit is very limited. Right? People say, well, I don't want Medicaid. Well, eventually you can. But do you want to deplete every dollar that you own before you go on Medicaid? There's a number of things you can do to protect your assets. Number one, the first thing is have a good estate plan in place. Make sure you have the documents we already discussed: will, living will, healthcare proxy, power of attorney, trust possibly. Have those. Those are the foundation. What's the next thing you should do? Well, if you're young and you have enough income, you might want to look into a long-term care insurance policy. They're not cheap, but they will cover some of these, if not all of these expenses, depending on what you're willing to pay for it. And obviously, the younger you are, the less the premium is going to be. So that's something to really consider, purchasing a long-term care insurance policy. But let's talk about the numbers, okay? What does this cost? What do nursing homes cost? Well, in the New York metro area, they could run from $350 a day up to $700 a day. So the first thing you have to do is look and say, does my income, will I be able to cover that based on my income? Or am I going to have to dig into my assets in order to cover it? If your income is going to cover it, then you really don't have to worry, right? If you have enough assets between your pension, your Social Security, the income being thrown off your assets, you don't have to worry. Most people are not in that position. For most people, they're not going to have enough income to cover it, which means their assets are going to start eating away. And for most people, their assets are going to be eaten away very quickly. So let's talk about how nursing homes are paid for. Number one, there is a limited Medicare benefit. 2, you pay for it out of your pocket. 3, you have a long-term care insurance policy. And 4, Medicaid. What does Medicare cover? First of all, in order for Medicare to cover your nursing home stay, there's a couple of criteria you have to meet. Number one, you have to be discharged from a hospital after a minimum of a 3-day stay. Number 2, you have to be going to the nursing home for rehabilitation. Classic example, older person falls, breaks a hip. Well, they have to go to the hospital. They have to have hip surgery. Then they have to go in for rehab. Well, Medicare will cover that. 20 days in full, and then there's an additional 80 days. But there's a significant copay. It's over $175 a day up to those additional 80 days. So the maximum Medicare benefit, 20 days in full, an additional 80 days with a copay. Now, one thing you should be asking, because Medicare has a lot of gaps in it, right? People buy Medigap insurance coverage. You really have to know, does my supplemental Medicare insurance cover this nursing home Medicare copay for days 21 through 100? This has nothing to do with Part B, Part C, Part D. This is a separate benefit. A lot of insurance policies do not have it. Most people don't know because they don't even think about it. It's important to know if you have this benefit as part of your health insurance. Now, think about it though. Remember, only if you need rehab. So what happens if you have someone who's home, they're otherwise physically healthy, but they have Alzheimer's, and they have a caregiver at home. Caregiver's taking care of them. Now the caregiver, for whatever reason, can no longer care for them, and they have to go strictly for custodial care. They have to go into a nursing home strictly for custodial care. What is custodial care? The daily activities of living. They need help feeding themselves. They need help washing themselves. They need help dressing themselves. They need help taking their medication. That's custodial care. Guess what the Medicare benefit is strictly for custodial care? A big fat zero. No benefit. Right? But let's take the hybrid. You have this person who is mentally not in good shape, but physically healthy. They walk out, they fall, they trip, and they break their hip, and they go to the hospital. They'll get Medicare during the rehab period. But remember, it's not a full 100 days. The nursing homes have to certify that you are benefiting from the rehabilitation. Once it's determined that you're no longer benefiting from the rehabilitation, they cut you off. So day 40, you're no longer benefiting from rehabilitation, your benefits are cut off. If you're otherwise healthy, they'll send you home. Let's say now you can't care for yourself anymore. You need this custodial care. You're not benefiting from rehab anymore, and now you can't get up and go to the bathroom, and the person who is taking care of you can't do it because now they can't pick you up anymore, and you have to stay in the nursing home. Well, what are your options? Medicare has been cut off. If you don't have a long-term care insurance, it's pay on your own, qualify for Medicaid. Now, if a lot of people come into me and say, well, I have $100,000 in the bank. I own a home. I have an IRA. I have a pension plan. How am I going to qualify for Medicaid? Well, let's discuss that. These are the qualifications for Medicaid for a single person. And when you have a spouse, there's the spousal component, which is engrafted on this. But first, we'll start with the single person. You can have approximately $15,500 in assets, liquid assets. Okay? You can have an IRA. You can have a home with equity in the home of about $880,000. You could prepay your funeral expenses. You can have a car, a few other personal items. Now, I also put in some provisions that allow you to a degree to control where this money goes, even after you've signed the trust and even though it's irrevocable. Let me tell you why. Here's a story that happened to me years ago and caused me to change the way I practice. I had a woman come in, we'll call them two sisters, Mary and Joan. Mary was single, never married, slight physical disability. And Joan had two children, she was a widow. Mary and Joan bought a two-family house together. They, got along well. The two adult children loved their aunt. They took care of it. They did all of this. Everything was wonderful. So For the disabled sister, I drafted a Medicaid trust and put her half of the house into the trust. Now, over time, the son of her sister, her nephew, didn't get married, continued to live with mom, and took care of his aunt. Whereas the sister got married, had children, moved out of the area. Well, guess what the aunt did? When she did the trust, she gave everything when she died to her nephew and cut out her niece. And now mom realized this, and mom says, because we had also done a Medicaid trust for mom with her half of the house. And when the sister died, she realized what happened. She goes, I want to change my trust. I'm like, you can't. So you mean my son's going to wind up with 3/4 of this house? Yep. So now, going back, and you're allowed to do this, I give the grantor, meaning the aunt in this case, the discretion to go in and say, well, or the mom, I can kind of change this. You can't add anybody. But you could say, I leave this to my issue, meaning my children or grandchildren, and I reserve the power to change the division. So let's say I get ticked off at one kid. Guess what? I'm going to cut you out. I'll leave it all to the other one. You could still do that. You can't take the money out yourself. But with these powers, you could still kind of make a determination as to where the money's going to go after you die. But you don't have control over the assets when they're in the trust. You get the income if you decide to put more than a house in, more than real estate. You put stock in, you get the dividends. Your trustee is now responsible to manage that for you, so you don't have control. You're giving up that control. But the trustee is held to a very high fiduciary standard. So they have to manage it for your benefit and for the benefit of those who are going to get it after you die. So with that scenario, after 5 years, whatever you put in there is fully protected. Can't be touched. So you may have put $500,000 in there and a house. 5 years later, you have to go in a nursing home. That money's fully protected. That's one strategy. People say, well, what if I didn't do anything 5 years in advance? What if mom's going in the nursing home tomorrow? Well, there are still things that can be done. Right? There are still ways of protecting assets. One way is to basically, and I'm not going to go into all the details of this, the person going to the nursing home can give away a whole bunch of money, and basically we can use the person they're giving it to can sign a promissory note to pay the nursing home bills for part of the time. And then after this time period elapses, the rest of the money that was given outright can be protected. So there are, without going into all the details, it gets very complicated. There are techniques that can be used to protect money, even if you're going in the nursing home tomorrow. So don't think that because mom's going in the nursing home tomorrow, all is lost. Obviously, the earlier you do this, the more you can protect. And even if mom's in the nursing home and she's paying privately, there are things that can be done. But obviously, the earlier they're done, the more assets you could protect. And this is also why it's extremely important. If the person in the nursing home now does not have capacity to transfer assets or do anything, that's why it's so important to have a power of attorney in place already. If not, well, we say, well, what if I don't have a power of attorney? Well, that happens too. And what do you do? Well, we talked about before the 17A guardianship for children. Now you do the Article 81 guardianship. You would file for guardianship to get control of mom or dad, whoever was going into the nursing home. And you'd ask the court for powers to do Medicaid planning so you can protect some of the assets. This is more expensive, more cumbersome, takes a long time. Where you'd spent a few $100s to do the power of attorney before, your estate wouldn't be and your family wouldn't be spending the few $1,000s to have an Article 81 guardian appointed for you to do it now when you're already in the nursing home. So it's always better to plan and get these things done.
Thank you so much, Joe, for that important information. And thank you, audience, for watching. If you yourself or someone you know may have questions on this topic, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call the law offices of Joseph Marra. They are professional, friendly, and really great at looking at the pros and cons of your situation, coming up with a fantastic strategy, and giving you some options. We look forward to hearing from you soon.